All right, folks, welcome to another episode of Beyond the Noise Signals, Stories, and Spicy Takes, the show where we dig into the stories of the people shaping the future of app based computing with a special focus on mobile. I'm your host, Matt Klein, co founder and CTO of Bitdrift, as well as the founder of Envoy Proxy. Each episode, we'll talk with engineers, founders, and technical leaders who've transformed the way their companies build and understand what's happening inside their systems. We'll dig into the challenges, the breakthroughs, the lessons learned, and wrap it all up with their hottest takes, so let's dive in. Our guest today honestly needs no introduction and is a personal role model of mine, so this is a really fun conversation to have. Miguel de Icaza is a software engineer and entrepreneur with a long history of contributions to free software, including starting GNOME, Mono, and Xamarin. A substantial portion of his career has been spent in the mobile space, and most recently, he's been contributing to the Godot game engine. Welcome, Miguel. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, man. It's good. It's good to connect again.
Yeah, we have talked many times over the years. We have a shared passion in open source software as well as mobile, so this will be a great conversation to have.
Yeah.
You know, your career is so long that we could spend hours and hours and hours talking, and we don't have that. So where I would really love to start is, you know, you've done so much in the free software movement over the years. I'd love to go back to the beginning, honestly, and just learn, you know, how you became interested in the free software movement. You know, how you started in that space. And I'm sure you have some very fun stories from the early days. So would just love to start there.
Yeah. So I used to write software for DOS, and I commercialized some of those pieces of software in Mexico. You know, it wasn't a big industry, but that's what I used to do. And just as this was happening, and I was an avid DOS user, and the world was transitioning to Windows, I started to, it's like, well, maybe I can build some Windows apps. And my God, that thing, when you would make a mistake, it would crash the system. And my computer, it used to take a minute to reboot, right? It was an IBM PS2 something. And man, that thing was so slow. And it was very frustrating. And around that time, the university started to get some Unix workstations. And, you know, it didn't have the nice graphics that you could get on Windows or run solitaire on these things. But man, when an app crashed, you would just get a beautiful seg fault, and you could keep on going, right? So you wouldn't need to reboot your computer. So I started to be drawn to Unix purely from, you know, not having to waste a minute every time that I crash my app.
Yeah, but this is back when this is not free Unix, right?
This is not free Unix.
This is like paid Unix, right?
Yeah. And what happened was that, I mean, Unix was amazing, but all I had there was VI. And then this friend of mine at university said, you know what? There's this thing called the GNU project, and they give away all this software. And there's this editor, Emacs, that is very similar to the one that you use on DOS, which is called Epsilon. And, you know, you should check it out. And, you know, this guy used to carry around this stack of paper. His name is Fernando La Mancha. And he used to carry this stack of papers of printouts of FTP sites. I don't know if you were around that time, but the way that you found software online was to go into these FTP sites, list the contents, and download stuff, right? And so he gave me a printout. And it's like, yeah, check this out. You know, check out the GNU stuff. They have some things. If you want to do some graphics, there's this thing called X, you know, download some of that, and, you know, you might find games on everything. So I downloaded this, you know, this free editor and GCC because I couldn't believe that somebody would give away a compiler. Right at the time, getting a compiler on DOS was, you know,
expensive,
expensive. And I was like, I can't believe somebody will do this, right? And I think that they were very proud of some optimization, and they were beating the Sun compiler. And let me just turn this off so that it doesn't distract me. And so I downloaded it. It's like, well, this is amazing. Why are people giving away this stuff for free? And I read Richard Stallman's manifesto, and man, I was hooked. I was like, what can I do for these guys, right? It's like, here's how you can contribute money. Well, I don't have money, so I can't do that. or maybe you can contribute to the effort. And so at the beginning was merely as a consumer and kind of promoting is like, hey guys, have you, you know that there's this gang of people just giving away stuff that at the time would have been super expensive on DOS. And then, I was a mediocre programmer. I mean, I knew some assembly and I wrote some code, but I wasn't that really, I was a mediocre programmer. But one thing that really bothered me about Unix was I didn't have my command line tool that I really loved. So I decided to clone that command line tool. It was the Norton Commander. So I cloned that thing for Unix, and that was my first contribution to GNU. I sent an email to Richard Stallman. I say, hey, I wrote this thing, it's a file manager. We should make it part of GNU. And that became part of GNU, which now I regret. But anyways, that was kind of my...
Why do you regret it?
Well, I regret it because once we did that, we had to get paperwork for copyright assignments and, that whole thing that was a thing at the time. And then Richard embarked on his whole rebrand Linux into GNU Linux. And I was like, why are we doing this? Anyways, so I regret doing that in retrospect. But,
what would you have done instead?
I think that I should have stayed as free software. I mean, it was free. There was no reason to be part of the GNU project. I think at the time I thought it was like, hey, if I make it part of GNU, I'm I'm helping the movement. And the reality is that you could help the movement with or without the GNU branding.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think it added a lot of friction, recording copyright assignments, and you send me a patch. Then if it's too long, you gotta email this to the FSF.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty interesting to me, just because obviously over the last 30, 40 years, I mean, there's been a progression, right, in terms of how people think about open source. I feel like in the time that you're talking about, it was like the evil Microsoft versus the people who were out there and doing free stuff. And then obviously over time, I mean, the world has obviously really moved to free software. But even today, if you look at the progression of licenses that people are using, like a lot of the stuff that you were just mentioning around copyright assignment, all of those things, people still argue about that.
Yeah, I don't disagree. It's good to have. But this also predates a little bit the Microsoft being evil. At the time, the evil people were the people fragmenting Sun. And Microsoft was starting with Windows, and they were certainly skyrocketing. But from my perspective, it was a shit OS. It was a terrible OS that crashed, didn't do multitasking. And of course, it's the era around FreeBSD starting to happen.
Yeah.
Linux starting to happen. And all of a sudden, I put in my tiny toy computer. It was within a year. It's a year or 2 year window where you start to run these free operating systems. And they were really bad at the beginning.
Yeah.
But it was better, right? It was better because they wouldn't crash, and it was better because I had the source, and it became a mission around the people in our circles that wanted to make Linux happen.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like personally for myself that there are times that I regret, that's the wrong word. I would have liked to have been 10 or 15 years older, because I feel like in the late 80s and 90s, that was kind of the golden era of operating systems. I mean, that's when,
yes.
Linux started, Microsoft did Windows NT, which was a not shit operating system. And, I mean, it's like there was a lot of stuff happening back then. It's a really exciting time to actually be involved.
It was fabulous.
So you found your passion in open source. Then obviously from there, at least from the outside, it seems that you have been more attracted, like more to the user interface side of things, right? I mean, obviously you started GNOME project. I mean, would love to learn more about, obviously you started doing these tools, but again, it seems to me that you really do like that user interface portion of things. So I guess, where did that come from?
Well, so it's interesting because what happened was that I initially was really much into when this whole movement started, and like you said, it was the golden era of operating systems. I wanted to bring, Richard Stallman had this vision of Mac, the Mac operating system that was the foundation of Herd, right? And I wanted to bring it to the Spark, which were the machines at the university. For all sorts of complicated reasons, that did not work out. But Linux was starting to come on the plane. So I joined the Linux for Spark, and I wrote a bunch of the device drivers for Linux at the time for video and keyboard and network and stuff like that. So I was very much in the operating system side of the house until a friend of mine said, "Why are you wasting time on this Spark thing? It's dead. A PC is just as fast." I was in denial, right? It's like, no, a PC will never be as fast as a Spark and a SCSI drive. And, as Linux starts to take up, it's like, well, for Linux to be relevant, we need to have a UI. So I didn't really care about the UI as much as this mission. I mean, I was a full-on convert to the movement. Really, building GNOME was, means to an end. And it was something that had to be done more than something I enjoyed doing.
But when you say that you were a convert, was it that you believe that all software should be free, or you believe that software should be accessible? Like, I'm trying to understand which part of it resonated with you the most.
I think that I thought that all software should be free and I should be able to modify all the software on my machine. And we were coming from, this is the era, I had, in the DOS world, we had these big fights, and probably people don't remember, don't care, but there were these big fights where Microsoft drove out some competitors by keeping some APIs proprietary. It was when they tried to drive Borland out and they wouldn't release certain information, and they dragged, so I felt that we could never really win when things were stacked against us in that way. So we're always going to be subject to the whims of a big corporation.
Yeah.
And it's funny because, the big corporations, they continue to, they're not playing that same game now. There's all kinds of different things. But at the end, massing capital and this, desire to grow at any expenses, they will always find a way of doing sneaky things. So at the time it was, device drivers and stuff like that. And now it's AI pricing depending on how much money you have. At the time I was really driven by this idea of having a fully open system, and it needed to be completely free so we could all innovate and, become completely, able to change whatever we wanted, grow whatever way we wanted. I had drank the Kool-Aid hard, was a fanatic of the GNU movement.
So that led you down the GNOME path, or like?
Yeah, so what happened was that there was this effort. Yeah, it's KDE folks. There was a previous effort called KDE, and KDE was amazing. It was an amazing desktop, but they had chosen a license that would prevent it from being free at the time. I even emailed Stallman at the time. I was like, hey, you got to start promoting this thing. It's incredible. KDE, it's amazing. And I also emailed Eric Trone, which was one of the founders of Red Hat. And I said, you got to ship this thing on Red Hat. It's amazing. And both of them within a day told me we can't, right? Eric Tron, very business-wise, is like, hey, we can't. The license doesn't allow us to do this. And Richard Stallman is like, oh, no, we can't, because then we would be building on a foundation that, we've done all this work up until this point, and now we're saying the UI, that will be locked up. So I started the GNOME project basically based on these two pieces of feedback, right? Eric, I had worked with on Linux on the Spark, and Richard on the GNU side of things. So it was started because the license prevented it from being free. And it led to some, nasty, open source drama for many over GNOME versus KDE, but fundamentally was a matter of license. One of the outcomes of GNOME is we certainly did that. There was an effort to clone Qt instead with an open license, but eventually Trolltech relented and changed the license, years down the line, and KDE became free. But anyways, that was the motivation. I was, full on Richard Stallmanite at the time. Right, we needed to have a free operating system from the ground up.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess based on the stuff that you've done in the rest of your career, I would imagine that you liked working on that. It's not like you went back to working on device drivers, right? So
right.
There like must have been something about that experience that you found formative.
Well,
I would imagine.
And I think that. Yes, and I think that just this morning, a guy was saying, he was telling me, like, oh, it's a shame that we're in different time zones and we can't collaborate in real time. He's in the UK or something. And I'm like, oh, dude, I've been working across time zones since 1992 or so. And I think that there was something really powerful, because here I was in Mexico. Nobody cared about what I cared, right? Nobody cared about free software. Software came late to Mexico, right? So the internet was this magical place where I was able to work with people with very similar interests from across the world, right? And we all cared about the same things, and we had never met, but we managed to all get together, right? Either with the Linux kernel or with the GNOME desktop or the Mina commander. And it was very addictive, right? Having a team of people and connecting with people that cared about the same things. It was a bit of a drug. It was kind of finding a purpose and getting excited and having these brainstorming sessions and hacking sessions and seeing things make progress. It was incredibly addictive. So even all these projects sometimes start off as a form of duty, but they kind of become your passion, right? And
Well, it's also too that I think that for a lot of these, I call it high performance open source projects, you'll never employ in a corporate environment the talent that you can gather in these projects.
yes,
Either because they're around the world, or they're just not all going to work in the same place,
yes,
or they don't want to work for that company. And I think that to me is one of the most amazing things, is that if it's done well, you can get just the level of engineering that you can work with in these
yes.
projects is absolutely astounding. And that's a pretty amazing thing.
First of all, I think that you really nailed it, because it is you get to find people that are expert in their domains. And I can tell hundreds of stories where an expert in a particular domain came in and said, "Hey, I can help with this." And he's at the top of his field doing things that nobody else has done, right? Like a guy was passionate about calendars and they fixed all the calendar setup. Another guy cared about Unicode in these very bizarre languages and he implemented that, right? So you get all these experts from the world that come together. And I think that the other problem is that corporate development has a problem that you always have this, you have this company vision of what you need to do, then you have the product itself, and then layers of management of people that may or may not understand, that may have different priorities, constraints, budgets, deliverables. So you end up making a lot of cuts, or you might not ship what you wish you had shipped. And open source essentially worked around all those issues.
With that said, though, you, in the more recent years, you're an entrepreneur. You have started companies around open source. You have worked for Microsoft. It's probably a good segue to talk a bit about, you said that in the beginning you're a quote fanatic, right? I would imagine over the years you've become more pragmatic around what it means to sustain software and have it work
Yes.
in the world and all of those things. So I'd love to learn a bit about, I guess, your thinking transition over the years, right? From becoming, again, a quote fanatic to, I don't know, like maybe tell us your current views, whether it be around open source sustainability or just like generally how you think about all of these things.
Very early on, we tried to build a business around pure open source, and it turns out that it was very difficult because, we had built this product and it was fully open source, and we went to Red Hat and say, "Hey, you should ship this to our users. It's going to be great. But you should give us some money." And then they came back to us and said, "No, in fact, you should give us money to distribute this." And that's when we realized, right? It was a little bit of a shock, because all of this time we're all collaborating, and then Red Hat business people come and say that, and then we realized we can't pay the bills this way. So we started to do proprietary stuff, and it was stuff that at that point the Red Hat folks couldn't ship, and they had to pay, right? The customers had to pay. So that was the beginning of having to find a balance for paying for things that we certainly continued to do. I would say the majority of our stuff was still open source, and but we had to add proprietary extensions.
Yeah, was it hard for you to accept at the time that building a business in pure open source is difficult? I mostly ask because I feel like, again, for the last 30 or 40 years, so many people have run up against this wall, right? It's
Yeah,
like
and I don't think
to figure out how to do that,
yes,
and it's not
and
easy.
I don't think that you can fully sustain it that way. I don't. And I think it's a good observation, because And I keep hoping that someone will come up with a sustainable model, right? I mean, they're still quoting that XKCD comic with the, all these bricks on top, and they say, the whole thing depends on this guy in Nebraska.
Right.
And, there's a bunch of people trying things, and I wish them all luck. Some of them are not open source, some of them are licenses that are peculiar. Some of them are asking for donations. Some people are putting their GitHub thing. Other people are putting like notices on their node packages or their whatever packages and saying, please donate, or, this is a license. And I wish them good luck, because these are people definitely that are very passionate, right? And they wish they could continue working on their passions, but they to pay the bills, maybe they have to work at the DMV. And I really wish, all these folks good luck, and I keep an eye on different models and ideas, and I encourage them. But yeah, no, I think it was a painful realization, and it was a very uncomfortable reality that at the time we were employing people, we were VC backed, and we were facing, well, the choices are you can fire all your friends, or you have to, sacrifice your ideals, right? So we did, the first thing that we did was this proprietary plugin. And in fact, Richard Stallman kicked me out of the FSF when I did this. I was on the board of the FSF. And I was like,
sorry,
we can't have
and
it here.
This is for which project? What was this?
We had an email client called Evolution, and we made a plugin for Exchange. So if you wanted to connect Evolution to Microsoft Exchange servers, we said, well, we figured this is, you should pay for that. Anyways, it started that way. And then we experimented with other things. In the mono era, we tried dual licensing. And dual licensing sort of worked, but our carve-out was so small that for all intents and purposes, we painted ourselves into a very tiny corner that was very difficult to finance.
Sorry, and the dual license in that scenario, explain that briefly for people.
So what we did is we said
pure open source, and then you had a different license for different usage.
Yeah, correct. So what we had is we had the full copyright of the Mono runtime engine. So the Mono was either a large chunk was MIT license, but the VM itself was LGPL. And the problem is that LGPL you can really use for almost anything. The only place where it was difficult was for people building things that that didn't want to get hacked, right? Or for embedded consoles or things like that. So Mono sort of veered towards only having a market in the gaming space. And a couple of other embedded vendors that we had, but we managed to license that to a handful of vendors, small ones, and the Unity folks, which became a big game engine. But it was a very difficult sales process, right? It's like, these are enterprise sales, it takes months, and then the deal might fall off, right?
Tell me about it. Yes.
Yeah, so it's a very slow sales cycle, and it was painful. So when the iPhone comes out, Unity comes to us and says, hey, we've banked our whole engine on .NET, and we need you to put it on the iPhone. We think that there's a big opportunity here. It's like, all right, well, we'll do it. We prototyped that, and we gave it to them. And all of a sudden, Unity took off, right?
Sorry, actually, just going back in time briefly, could you talk a bit about how did you get interested in the .NET ecosystem in the beginning? Like, how did that part start?
Oh, so what happened was, we had been building GNOME for a long time. It was entirely written in C. Although the original vision was write code in any language, right? We had, another cool lay that we drank around the time was John Osterhout's Tico. You got to write your high-level code in a scripting language, right? And we tried that at the beginning with GNOME, but the problem is that scripting languages in 1997 were really slow, right? So it's like...
I mean, they're still pretty slow, but I guess that's it.
Right. Let me tell you. So at the time, GNU had their own scripting language. It was called Guile, right? And it's like, all right, we're going to write apps in Guile for the GNOME desktop. That's the way to go. So I don't know, we wrote like a calculator and whatever, right? And the problem was that just starting up Guile took like 13 seconds, right? So here you're waiting for your calculator to come up for 13 seconds. It was like, Jesus Christ.
Right.
Right. So we ended up writing everything in C because at the time we needed C. And so So there was always this struggle between we need something that is fast, right, that can be compiled, but also high level. And we had looked at Java. In fact, GNOME had very early Java bindings. The problem, again, at the time was that Java was proprietary.
Right. Okay.
And the issue at the time was that there was really no interest in building a pure Java version. There were a couple of efforts, but they were essentially drained of contributors because most people are like, well, we have the proprietary that works well enough. Why build an open source one? So the only people working in the open source one were the people that kind of approach it from a principled perspective, right? And when .NET came out, it's like, well, this is almost like Java. It's almost like Java. It's almost what we need. It has all these extra feature that Java doesn't have. But the big draw was that there was no open source version. So very quickly, we got a bunch of people together working. So in terms of collaboration, it exploded where Java efforts had essentially stagnated.
Yeah, it's interesting to me just because of what you said, right? Is that at least from my understanding at the time that .NET came out, it was similar to Java in the sense that Microsoft owned the runtime and the runtime was proprietary and all of those things. So I guess take me through again, like I don't really see the difference, to be honest, of
so the
throwing
thing
your
is that
resources behind OpenJDK, like versus doing something on .NET. So like, what was it about .NET specifically that took you down the .NET path?
So feature-wise, they're very equivalent, right? But we couldn't use Java for building the open source desktop because it was proprietary. So there needed to be an open source Java to exist.
Right.
And the problem is that despite years of efforts, like the Jafar VM, the Cafe VM, the Kawa VM, despite all these efforts to try to come up with something, they kept getting stalled because there was not enough momentum. Not enough people cared for this.
Right.
So they're like, well, we'll just use the original one. Why bother with this, right? So it put us in a position where Java wasn't really evolving in the open source world. And then with the .NET thing, what happened is like, well, this is what we want. And it's also proprietary. But the good thing is that Microsoft did not ship anything for Unix.
I see. So you could basically start from scratch and own the thing from the beginning and not deal with the baggage of like the stalled open source projects and all.
Yes. So it was not stalled. So we started it and there was a high risk that it would flop, right? And that nobody would be interested, like Java. But the opposite happened, right? Because there was no .NET for Unix in any form or shape, right? There was nothing.
Got it. Makes sense. Okay.
Anyways, we ended up growing a big community very quickly. And it was very, it was a vibrant community. And it was really a means to an end, right? It's like we want to develop high-level applications with a compiled system. And that's how we ended up with GNOME and with Mono.
Right. Okay. All right. So thanks for that background. And now let's go back into the iPhone, because I think that's probably the beginning of your major interest in the mobile space.
Yes.
I do have, so not to sway the conversation one way or the other, but one thing that I think is interesting that I'd love to pick your brain on, especially since you're passionate about free software, and I've actually asked this of most of my guests, is that if you look at the Android ecosystem, Android based on free software, right? It's like iPhone, very, very proprietary.
Yes.
And I think there's pros and cons to both. I know that you're a big Apple iPhone fan, so I'm actually curious as to just given the base of Android, right? It's like, why not more Android? Maybe, there might be some company history here, but I guess like take us through that.
Well, the first thing that you have to keep in mind is that a lot of my fanboyism for Apple, it really started as mocking the Apple fans that were over the top. You could not say anything bad about Apple without them making up anything. You're holding it wrong and that sort of thing. So some of it was sort of a parody on. I was trying to parody the Apple fans of the time. But, one day, Fedora system comes up with an error on the disk and says, hey, your hard drive is about to die. I was like, oh, this is really neat. I didn't know that Linux could do this. It's like, you should replace it. It's like, oh, this is awesome. So went a new hard drive, went under my desk, and it was a difficult place to get to. So I unplugged all the cables, got the thing out, yanked it out, swapped the drives, put it back in, shove it in, and then I'm plugging all the cables back on my machine. I can barely get. It's very difficult to get in there and the back and the machine is anyway. And I plug almost everything, and then I have to plug the audio thing for the speakers. I was like, why bother? The audio never works here. Right, so it's like I left it unplugged, and that was the beginning, right? That was the beginning of we talked about how corporations sometimes can't do things that open source can, but one thing that corporations were able to fund, and I was very jealous of Apple. This is an era where people still care about printers, right? So they have printer device drivers, right? They have printer device drivers, and they even funded this thing called COPS. And they have working audio device drivers and working CD drivers and working Ethernet drivers. And at the time, every time you got a new laptop, it's like you would have to go to this web page and see, status update, which devices work, or what things you can't get to work, or does suspend work, or does whatever work.
I think I went through the same transition as you. I mean, there was a multi-year time period in which I was running Linux and I even had it on my laptop. And eventually, maybe it's just me getting older, you get frustrated about just nothing working all the time, and you just want something that works so you can go about your business. But anyway.
Or suspend, right? It's like my ThinkPad would crash every 5 suspends, right? So it's like I would get maybe a couple of days before I had to reboot the ThinkPad. Anyway, so that's how it started. The real thing, not the mocking the Apple crowd, is like, well, they actually can fund some fundamental stuff that needs to happen that open source is not good at. And I think that open source still suffers from a lot of this.
Well,
and I understand, right?
Well, I was going to say, and I mean, don't get me wrong. I think Apple does an amazing job, but on this topic, just separately, it blows my mind when you think about the engineering that Microsoft has to do when they don't control all of the hardware like Apple does, right? And the fact that it works as well as it does on so many different computers. I think most people just don't think about what is involved in that. I mean, it is a Herculean effort to actually make that happen. Sorry.
The thing is, to this day, I work for Microsoft, but I barely use Windows there. And to this day, I just can't talk myself into using it. I just don't like it. And so I've never had to use it.
Right. Yeah.
Every once in a while, I have to use PowerPoint or something like that. And even these days, I don't have actually a Windows machine with me.
Yeah.
I have to boot a VM to run a thing.
I also haven't used Windows in a long time. It's not me being a proponent of Windows. Yeah. I was mostly just commenting on how hard it is to make all the stuff work as.
Yeah. And the thing is that open source is really good. It's really good at certain things. They will innovate in areas where companies will never fund or peer funding or do the funding. But on the other hand, open source, you rely on people's spare time and contributions. Yes. in many cases, and they will break the software because we don't have time to support more than this, and we really want this other thing. So there's this very difficult position where every free software project finds itself, where it's great software, but you can't really rely on it, right? Because we're going to change the file format, and it's your fault for not, right. Or whatever, or the API or whatever. And
okay, so
anyway, so back to the Android thing. Yeah. So I think one of the things that happened with Linux is I love Linux, with all my heart. And the blessing is all of the blessings that we have already enumerated, right? The community contributions, the growth, the device drivers, all the support. Now Linux is a force to reckon with. But on the other hand, I think that innate in open source is the fragmentation that we see, right? So we have hundreds of distributions and libraries and compatibility issues, and it is just part of the system, right? And Android, to some extent, made that, they brought a lot of goodness, but they carry that baggage, and it manifested in slightly different ways, right? With Android, you had people that took open source Android or the Google version, and then they modified it, and then they abandoned it, right? So you have the telcos doing this, right? The phone companies that don't care about the operating system, they needed something, they put it in, and they ship it. Then you have the handset manufacturers that are a dime a dozen, and they might not have the best practices in mind, right? The people consuming and shipping these versions are a little bit like the homegrown Linux distros of the 90s, right? Where, every country had like 10 distros, like homegrown distros. We ended up with this difficult and fragmented Android ecosystem, right? From device drivers that didn't work, from updates that didn't happen to, so it just ended up accumulating all this craft. So I guess if you're using a Google Pixel Android, you're probably okay, give or take your position on Google, right? But for all the other ones, it's like, you get the Samsung one and it's loaded with all kinds of stuff that you might not care or want, and it's not remotely open source, right? So, from this perspective, just from the Android version that you can use, it seems like the good one that you can use if you care about privacy is Graphene OS, right? Which is not the full Google Android experience, or, really that's it. I would say the second one that I would use is probably the Google one. And in this world, I kind of have drunk, I wouldn't say drunk the Kool-Aid, but I kind of appreciate the effort that Apple puts into securing the OS, right? Yeah. So when it comes to that, that's kind of the platform that I feel more comfortable with nowadays.
Does it also come back to the commercial stuff? I mean, because you were talking about how you had got asked to do mono for iPhone. I mean, did you spend more time with that platform during that time?
Well, we did a little bit, and I certainly like what Apple did with iOS, but we also ported mono to Android, and that was also very successful. So Xamarin ended up being, we'll take mono, we'll add proprietary extensions for Android and iOS, and we'll ship it. And both of those were very successful. And what I have to say, perhaps the reason why I don't like Android so much was the size of my iOS team was much smaller than my Android team. And it was just because when you had a crash on an Apple product, it's like, all right, we figure out what it is, right? But with Android, it was a universe of failures. We had to deal with, and our product took such a beating from, well, this Xamarin doesn't work on Android because blah. And when you look at it, it's like, yes, some of those were bugs, but 90% of it was dealing with fragmented ecosystem, drivers that didn't work, CPUs that didn't work. There's this beautiful write-up about how we caught an interrupt handler that, it was a hardware bug that went and overrode your memory. So we had to patch every signal handler with a bunch of, knobs at the beginning, and that jumps dynamically. It was a disaster, right? But it was like this every time. It's like audio, graphics, old versions of these, unpatched versions of the operating system. We ended up building a product called Test Cloud. And our big pitch was upload your app, we'll run the tests on, 100 different SKUs, and we'll come back with the reports to you. And it was ridiculous just how much the same test failed everywhere, right? With iOS, there was really not much of a product, right? You can run, it was just like a test runner, and either it passed or it didn't. And maybe the layout would be off in a few places. But with Android, you would submit this thing, and you would get like a 5% success rate. It's like, what the hell, right? So that kind of soured me on Android. And maybe it has improved, but
yeah, I mean,
it was too late.
There must be some examples, though, of finding issues on the iOS ecosystem.
Yes.
And not issues, but not having the source code to be able to debug those issues.
Absolutely.
I mean, that is a very difficult situation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it does happen. It's just the volume of those, where they were a very different ballpark. There were different orders of magnitude. So anyways, that's how I ended up kind of on the iOS world out of, I joke sometimes that the reason I use high level languages is that, I'm on the way out, right? I mean, I'm 50 something, right? I'm already, I'm really to land the plane. So I only have limited amount of time, and I just don't have time to deal with another stupid C overflow buffer, whatever, double free. Bleh. Life is too short for that.
Well, who does now? I mean, it's like
Yeah, fuck that. So I'm a high level kind of guy, and that also translates a little bit into me using a Mac as a desktop, me using an iPhone as my computing device.
right.
Um,
Yeah.
oh,
And then I guess so you spent your time obviously working at Xamarin and doing the products that we talk about, and then you wound up at Microsoft, obviously working
mhm.
on .NET a bit. I mean, I don't know, like based on your long background in this space, was it strange for you to go to Microsoft? I mean, it's like
It
what
was,
was it?
but I
Yeah.
think that the way I internalized it. So for many years, we had this difficult collaboration with Microsoft where they would keep saying, "We're going to sue you one day," and there were people that were working with us that were very nice, like Scott Guthrie. And Scott Guthrie is a guy that we met from the very early days of .NET when he was just an engineer, and he ends up being someone high up at Microsoft over a bunch of steps. And one day, one of our investors at Xamarin manages to secure a meeting with the head of cloud computing at Microsoft, who was Satya Nadella at the time. And we went there and we pitched Xamarin, and they're still working on their Balmer, but they're kind of running their own thing. It's like, well, Balmer is his own thing. We're going to try to do something together here. So we had a very productive conversation with Satya and Scott Guthrie and all of those folks. And we have a collaboration, even with this tense situation with Microsoft and open source at the time.
Yeah.
But it's working well. So we like this team. We like this team very much. They're sticking their necks out for us in a world where Ballmer hates everyone's guts. And then Ballmer, I don't know, was Ballmer ejected or he left? I can't remember. But Ballmer leaves. And then Satya, our guy that has been helping us, ends up being the CEO. Right. So, like 4 years later, 3 years later, when they acquire us, is like, these are people that we both like working with, that had stood up for us, right, during during this dark period at Microsoft. So it didn't feel so bad, right? And the other thing that was really interesting is that Satya, I don't know where he got this, but when he became CEO of Microsoft, he understood that there was a cultural problem at the company, right? It was very much a macho company. It was a very much a little bit like the US government is right now. It's like, we'll take things by force. And he wanted to change that culture. So he had a whole program of culture reshaping at the company, which it's very interesting on its own.
Well, it's funny, and I don't know that I've ever said this publicly, but I'll say it now. Is I actually, I started my career at Microsoft, and then I was there in the very early 2000s. And this is the part that I haven't said publicly, is that for the middle part of my career, I would have a recurring nightmare where I would wake up in Microsoft new employee orientation, like having rejoined Microsoft, and then like run out of the room screaming, right? It's like that's how I felt about going back and actually working there. But to your point, I mean, in the last 5 to 10 years, it is incredible for me to see what Microsoft has done. I mean, just from the developer tools ecosystem to the embrace of open source technologies to all of these things. It's like it really is a different company now. I mean, it is pretty impressive, like to the point where I would not run out of the room screaming at this point if I came back to Microsoft. But anyway, sorry. So I can totally understand what you're saying.
And the thing that to me is very interesting is that as I grew, from my teen years to my 20s, opinionated 20s to all of this time, I usually have, like almost every young engineer, have a low opinion on management, right? There are a bunch of bozos. And, working really under these Satya cultural changes, like it really shows you that if you have a manager that cares, I was
Absolutely.
like,
Yes.
that the culture really plays a big role. And as a teen or a 20-year-old engineer, like when people talk about culture, your eyes just glaze over, right? Like when I tell my teens, and that, whatever about life, and they're like, oh, Dad, please stop
Right.
lecturing us. I would feel that way. But once you see, this is what culture does, and it has an impact on, like you said, people had these reactions, these very,
Yeah.
shitty reactions, anxiety attacks over having shit managers. So I do appreciate that. So now I like, I sound probably like an old 50-year-old man talking about culture and the importance of culture.
It's true. So you ended up leaving Microsoft, and now, I mean, just from what I can tell, from your social media posts and all of those, you've become very interested in the open source gaming world. So I guess like tell us a bit about how that came about.
Yeah. So when I left Microsoft, I really wanted to, for all these years that I told people, that I was building tools for developers to do mobile apps. I really fell in love with this subculture of, polishing an app and having a great application. And, but I was looking at it from the outside, right? I was giving tools to people and then telling them, you should probably do this, right? Your UI probably should do that. And I really wanted to build something myself that I hadn't done in 15 years, since GNOME, really. And I would say the GNOME UI is good, not because of me, but because of everybody else that joined, right? So I hadn't really had a first time experience doing UI on my own. And I was really looking forward to it. So we started doing that. And one of the things that we thought we could do, right, to combine kind of my desire to do an end user product as opposed to frameworks and tools and things like that, was to port Godot to the iPad. And it's funny because when I left Microsoft, it's like, no, I want to build just consumer apps. I don't want to ever build another developer tool. I don't want to work with developers, right? Developers, the problem with developers is that they're very smart and they think that every problem that you face, they could fix faster than you and do a better job. Right. So the problem with developers is like, man, they're a very tough crowd.
Yep,
And
sure are.
and I didn't want to work with them again. It's like, no, please, no more developers. They're horrible.
But had you been sitting there, you're kind of now half retired, half not. I mean, had you been just kind of like coming up with ideas of things that you could work on? I mean, it's like, how did you wind up, I guess, knowing about Godot and like working in that ecosystem?
So again, I had already worked with Unity before. We put C# in Unity, and during my Microsoft years, I got funding, and during the Xamarin years, I used my company funds to fund Godot, to put .NET on Godot.
Got it.
So I got all those funds to put .NET on Godot, and we're minding our own business in the industry, doing whatever, and then one day Unity, the company that does this thing, decided to commit what I think is, I mean, I've never seen anything like this. They commit corporate suicide.
Yes. Right. Yep.
And it's rare to see this, right? So I was there, front row, right? We all of us, in this last 3 years, we had front row seats to see one of the few. This is it's like a pandemic. It happens every 100 years. Somebody commits something as dumb as what they did, right?
Yeah.
And they said,
and for people that don't know, just could you very briefly say what happened?
Yeah, so I'll explain. So Unity essentially told people, hey, you pay us this much, you get this from us, right? And people would essentially build their plans, their businesses, they did everything based on the pricing that they had published. And you have to understand that when you build a game, it's a little bit like a movie, right? Some games you can certainly publish in 6 months, but many of them run for 3, 4, or 5 years, right? So you make business plans based on this. And then Unity decided that they needed to make more money. And then they said, well, retroactively, folks, what we're going to do is if you ship a game, we're going to take a cut from the game. And, maybe it's fair, maybe it's not, whatever. But a lot of people had made business decisions and multi-year investments based on what had been promised first, right? So you make your business plan, you budget your thing, you go to, you get investors based on these things. And Unity decides to pull this off. Rather than repealing that the next day, right, they keep dragging this on and fine-tuning the message and adding exclusions. And every time they do this, it gets worse. and I don't know, this goes for around 3 months of mistakes, right? It's one is worse than the previous, and the community is up in arms. So we're watching this, right, with a lot of interest. And then Godot, I mean, there's hundreds of game developer tools, thousands of them, right? But Godot is the only one that is sort of close to the Unity model, right? And it's also, and it's not close to Unity model just because it has a UI, but they've decided to do an end-to-end solution rather than being a stitchwork. Because there's a lot of things that like, well, focus on this and then you do the rest. And the Godot people essentially had done an end-to-end solution. So they start to get a lot of people, and a lot of people start to contribute to Godot. So it sort of explodes, and we're watching this explosion of interest, right? As we're thinking about doing consumer apps. And against my better judgment, because Godot is a developer tool.
Sorry, when you say we, had you been involved with them separately, like on the side, like either advising them or involved? Because
not advising. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
So when I say we, is one of my co-founders from Xamarin and myself. We're starting this company. We don't know what we're gonna do. Right? We want to work together again, and but we don't know what. And we've decided we're not gonna do any AI because
got it. Okay,
we don't know anything about AI. And but while I was at Microsoft, right, on my spare afternoon hacks, one of the things that I did was to bind Swift and Godot, right? And it was a departure from the .NET thing because I had met the guy that did Swift, Chris Latner, at some conference. I had my prejudice against Swift, and we sat down and we talked about it, and he walks me through what they're doing and their model and their vision. It's like, oh my God. And at the time, he was no longer at Apple. He had already moved to Google. And I was like, oh my God, this Swift language is really amazing. So anyways, I decided to explore Swift. I like it. And then one of my afternoon hacks was essentially binding Swift to Godot. So when this thing happened, it's like, oh, I have an excuse to use my pet project.
Got it.
Right.
Okay. Makes sense.
So that was it.
But now, Godot is open source, but
yes.
There is a company behind it, right? Is that right?
Well, there are a bunch of companies.
Work exactly.
So there are a bunch of companies. So Godot is open source, but there's a company that provides porting services. So one of them does, I think they do Switch, right? So if you have a game and you want to port it to Switch, they did the proprietary port.
Got it.
Because it needs to be under assorted NDAs.
Right.
There's another company then that came into the market from one of the founders. So one of the founders went and created this company, and they specialize on Xbox, PlayStation, and Nintendo Switch, right? And then there's a bunch of consulting companies. So, it's it's like many other open source projects. So
got it.
Yeah.
Okay, but you decided that you wanted to be part of the ecosystem, so you
Yes.
decided to build. Coming back to what you're saying before, you decided to build a developer tool for building games on iPad, right? So
yes.
Is it, and just for my personal curiosity, like, do people typically build games on iPad? Like, don't they use a desktop computer? It's like,
I don't think they do. I don't think they do. I personally don't do it. I like my big ass display with my big ass CPU.
Right.
And I do that. But, my children are spending a tremendous amount of time building worlds on Minecraft and things like that.
I know.
Right.
So are mine.
And,
yes.
And then I looked at Roblox Studio. My son uses Roblox Studio. And I was like, oh, this thing is hideous. My good Lord, this can't possibly be this bad. But it works, right? And but that's a PC application. And we figured, well, let's try this out. And one thing that happened as we were going through this thing is we looked at the Godot people actually port Godot to Android. And it's a verbatim port, right? It's like they'll run the desktop app in Android as is. There's no tuning for the UI, which is what I wanted to do. And we looked at the downloads and it was like, this is ridiculous, right? This is like 2 years ago. It's like 500,000 downloads of this thing. It was like, who gets this many downloads? Anyways, maybe it was just people curious, but then they've been publishing the numbers of active monthly users and active daily users, and it's insane. It's insane the number of people that were using it on Android. So it's like, well, there's, this sounds interesting. So we ported it, and I mean, I don't know what people are doing. Certainly some people tell us what they're doing, and they're on our Discord and they tell us. So we have a bunch of little anecdotes, but I don't know what the rest of the people are doing.
Cool. Yeah.
And the other thing that was surprising was that people said you should put it on the iPhone. I was like, well, that makes no sense. That makes absolutely no sense. And then a guy at our user group goes like, here's how I use the Android version to fine tune my games on my commute. All right, that's fair, but I think you're just weird. And then the Godot people go and publish their numbers, and half of their users, right, of their active users, right, spending more than an hour on this thing are on Android phones. So
really?
It's like, good. What are people doing? Anyways,
wow.
I guess they're tuning their game or tuning parameters or tuning whatever. But we did launch the iPhone version eventually against everything I believed, and it now makes up half of our users. So it is okay. So I don't know. At least there's 4,000 people using that on
So is this a hobby project for you? I mean, like, is
there no. Well, it is. I mean, it's a hobby, but it's also what I want. I want that to pay the bills eventually, right? So we're investing right now on. We're not VC funded, so we're paying it for ourselves, but we're investing on tutorials and sample code and adding more features and all that stuff.
Cool. So you can't stay away, I guess, from the business.
I thought I was ready to
open
retire.
Source ecosystem. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I thought I was ready to retire, but no, it ain't happening yet.
Okay. Well, we could keep talking forever, but we're pretty much at time.
Thank you.
Are there, I don't know, any predictions for the future of things that you're excited about?
Terrible at predicting, but I can tell you, I'm so excited about the industry. There is and across the board, it's like we've never had this much amazing software. And I don't know if you still do this, but I go and check Hacker News every day, and I see what people are building. I don't read the comments, you should not read the comments, but, I'm still amazed at everything that people are building every day. It's like, it is addictive just to learn what makes people tick. And,
do you still write all of your software by hand, or have you started to use any of the AI tools?
I love writing my software by hand. I love it. The one thing that I do love AI for, this is magical. This is my secret power. Whenever I get a stack trace, a crash, right, and these obscure crashes, it's like, what the hell is going on here? So I get my crashes from Xcode, and I just paste that thing from random users, right? I paste that thing into AI Studio, and I say, go figure it out.
Like, well, if you were using Rust, you wouldn't have any crashes. So
that is true. But this is C++, right? This Godot is using C++, and good Lord. And then there's all this. Anyways, I love it for that. It is magical, really. The codex tool on the command line, you paste stack traces, like, go figure it out. And sometimes it's wrong, but a lot of the times, like, here's a race because I went and looked at the 20 stack frames.
Yeah.
And the only way this could happen is because of this. I'm like, impressive. So I use it. Like every day I get a new crash, it goes straight into the bin.
I thought you said that you were over buffer overflows and stack traces and
but
all
it happened because I'm using this stupid C++ library. It's horrible. It's horrible. My first talk at the Godot conference, my first pitch at the Godot conference was, listen guys, let's rewrite the editor in Swift. I think it's possible.
All right. That's a fantastic place to end. We'll have to check back in with you in a year or so and see what's going on with your new business. Thank you so much. This is a great conversation. So that's a wrap for this episode of Beyond the Noise, Signals, Stories, and Spicy Takes. Huge thanks to Miguel for joining and sharing his story. You can find this episode and all past ones on the Bitdrift YouTube channel. If you had fun, drop us a review, tell your friends, or yell your favorite hot take into the void. So just make sure to tag us. I'm Matt Klein, and I will see you next time. Thanks a lot.